so we're going to move on to the last of the main questions, and then we're going to move to questions and comments from the audience. So our final, not final question, but the final question just directed directly to the panelists before we move to the audience is about the bailouts and capitalism. Because, as I mentioned before, in 2008, as the economic crisis started gaining more and more momentum, we saw a cascading effect of bank after bank on Wall Street collapsing or teetering on the brink of collapse. And in response to that, the U.S. government intervened with over $14 trillion in taxpayer bailouts or various guarantees for the banks and financial system. And that provoked an enormous political uproar in U.S. society, one of the greatest in actually many decades of popular anger and outrage at that bailout. So the question to both Keli and Ramy is, does this show the capitalist free market, what happened in 2008 and that this economic crisis and the bailouts of Wall Street, does this show that the capitalist free market system failed? And we're going to start 4 minutes with Ramy.
All right. I would say yes. I would say absolutely the free market system failed. I mean, the ideologues of free market capitalism had their way for the last 30 years. That's been the dominant, basically every ruling party practically all around the world with a few exceptions implemented what's called free market capitalism or neoliberalism, which was a return to liberal capitalism like we used to have in the 19th century and pre the Russian Revolution, pre-Great Depression. And so they've had their way. The free marketeers have had their way for the last 30 years. Unions have been rolled back. The power of unions have been weakened in workplaces. Corporations have enjoyed free trade and looser regulations. And what was the result? The result was a total collapse of our global capitalist system. They plunged the world into the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. So the interesting thing was many governments around the world, including both the Bush and Obama administrations, had to step in to bail out their banks. So you had state intervention in the economy to protect the capitalist system. And yet the Tea Party promotes free market policies and no state intervention in the economy. And I think it's a contradiction because if the state had not intervened, if the state did not step in to bail out the banks, there would have been an even worse economic crisis than the one we've been suffering through for the last 2-3 years. It was necessary for governments to intervene in the economy and protect the banks from total collapse. And this does show a failure of the free market system. The banks were making risky investments, and investment firms were making risky investments. They were banking on things that they were hoping that the value of housing would keep going up, and they were dealing in mortgages and derivatives and securities in a way that they couldn't back up. And as soon as the price of housing fell, they had all these loans that they could not afford to pay. All these banks had all these loans out that they could not afford to pay. So the free market failed. The free market failed. The banks on their own, the investment firms on their own, created a giant economic disaster, and the state had to intervene. Even President Bush admitted that the market had failed. So I agree with President Bush on that one thing. Now, it's come out recently that now 6 banks control 60% of our gross domestic product. And I just don't think we should have 6 private banks in control of 60% of our economy. I think that's insane. I don't trust the bankers with all that much money. Do you trust 6 banks to control all that much money? I think this is a classic example of the anarchy of the free market and why we need regulation, but not even just regulation. I think we need public ownership of those banks and democratic control of those banks. I think it's an untenable position to just say, well, no, we need the free market, Clearly, the free market didn't work. If the Tea Party is so committed to free market policies, then I would ask, why did your brilliant leader, Sarah Palin, she actually supported the bank bailouts? And why did John McCain support the bailouts? It's because it's not tenable to always support so-called free market ideas. It's blind ideology that doesn't actually match what works in reality. And so we socialists would have done the bailouts very differently. We actually don't support the bailouts the way they happened. The way Obama and Bush did it was a handout to the banks. They put no regulations really on how much the CEOs could get paid. the way socialists would have done it is, we wouldn't just give all this money to banks so they can keep just enriching themselves. We would say, if the taxpayers are forking over $14 trillion of our taxes, the taxpayers should have some control over that money. The bankers shouldn't be using that money to enrich themselves while workers are being laid off, homeowners are losing their homes. We would say those big 6 banks should be publicly owned and democratically controlled by a government, not this government, this capitalist government, but by a new government that's actually created by ordinary working people for working people.
Yeah.